But for now, we'd like to use some of the time to allow the two people who really put this event together, who I will thank again when the commissioner gets here, and those are our senator and assembly person. Let me introduce them, and they can decide who goes first. They are Senator Jack Martins and Assemblywoman Michelle Schimel.
Thank you, Dr. Dolan. My name, as you have guessed, is Michelle Schimel. This is actually, my children went to Great Neck, so this is particularly important for me, and I see a number of faculty members who, and I have to tell you, and the one thing I'd love to say to the commissioner is my children, who are old men now, are gainfully employed. They learned so much from, I'm going to talk about the Great Neck School District. They are both employed, they did well in college, and this is something, this is a thank you card to the faculty, administrators of the district. I know every district that I have is wonderful. And I think something that I've been working very closely with Senator Martins, the minute I've been here a little bit longer than him, but the minute we got in together, we started working together, particularly on education. We've had a wonderful opportunity to work with all the superintendents, all the school boards, and I see a lot of, hey, Mark. I want to say that I get it. I know Jack gets it, and I call him Jack. We get it. This is a unique opportunity. I'm going to hopefully get to thank Roger Tillis, Regent Tillis, who is a longtime friend of mine, for allowing us this opportunity to meet with the commissioner. This is going to be very provocative. I hope we all behave ourselves. I know there's a lot of tension. I can feel it. I feel the tension, but it's a good tension. Diversity, exchange of ideas makes all the difference in the world. Do want to say, and the one thing, and Senator Martins and I talked about this, that we hope this discussion is not begin and end today, that this is an opportunity to meet again, even if it means you got to come up to Albany. But we want this to be an ongoing dialogue because things are changing, especially with APPR, as we speak. Am I right? Today in the newspaper, yesterday in the newspaper, it's unfolding. That's a little disappointing to me because I think when we came to vote for it, we thought things were kind of settled. Obviously, it's not settled. So this is an opportunity for us. I'm going to turn it over now to Senator Martins. I thank you all for being here. I know how busy we all are, but certainly everyone knows how important this is and what an opportunity it is for us to express ourselves living on the northwest corner of Nassau County, what is going on in our schools and with our students and our children, who are by far, I will say over and again, we care deeply, deeply about. Thank you so much.
Well, it's great to see everyone here. Thanks very much for coming out. I guess about a month ago, Regent Tillis reached out to the Assemblywoman and I and offered that the commissioner was going to be here on Long Island. Would we like to hold a forum, and how would we like that forum to be presented? You know, we had the option of doing it at a single school, a limited forum, a discussion between the Assemblywoman, I, and the commissioner, and we said, you know, why don't we do something a little bit, I think, more comprehensive? Let's take the opportunity to invite our superintendents, our boards of education, put a panel together, and let's have a discussion, because when it comes to education policy in New York State, it's set by the regents, it's set by the commissioner, it affects all of us, and no more so than our superintendents, who have to deal with it each and every day, and our boards of education. So it's not up to us as elected officials to be part of that discussion, but I think it's certainly part of us to sit here, listen, take the opportunity to learn from this exchange. You know, I've had an opportunity over the last 2 years to get to know most, if not all of you. And I can tell you that I've learned a tremendous amount over the last 2 years when it comes to not only education policy, but how fortunate we are here in Nassau County to have the school districts that we have, to have the lighthouse districts that we have, to have the opportunities to have our children learn in this environment, and that we are special, we are different. We do have extraordinary school districts, and we worked very hard to have our school districts at the levels that they are. And I understand that there are school districts out there that are struggling, but these are not the school districts that are struggling. And so when we talk about the need to test, or over-test, and we can get into the particulars of that, and when we discuss teacher evaluations, and rubrics that have been in place for our various school districts, there are exceptions, and there should be exceptions because, let's face it, when you're graduating 99% of your student body and 95% of your kids are going on to college, guess what? You're doing it right. And so if you're doing it right, why should you change the way you got to where you are for something that has been untested because Albany feels that one size fits all? And we all know that, you know, the key to our local government and certainly our school districts has always been community control. That's why we have our boards of education. That's why we make decisions communities by community. And this one-size-fits-all approach that is being forced upon us is a little odd. So we'll take the opportunity. I welcome the opportunity. I thank everyone for coming out. And, you know, as we mentioned, we had hoped that the commissioner would be here at 5 o'clock. We do have a cutoff because he does have another commitment as well. Hopefully we can bump up or bump into that commitment a little bit and make up for some of this time. But we did want to take the opportunity to recognize the panel that we have here and the school district superintendents and boards of education who came. Thank you. Thanks very much for coming out. Looking forward to the dialogue. Thank you.
After that kind of endorsement of our schools, I think we're done here. Good night. Thank you very, very much, Michelle and Jack. Again, what I'm going to do now is allow the panel to introduce themselves, perhaps tell a little bit about their district, and maybe a bit about our conversations that have taken place over the last few days. There is in the back, and I'll ask Dr. Hickey if he could hand them out if people did not get them. There is a flyer that we're going to put up on the screen, and I will hand Dr. King a copy of it. Some of you may have seen it before. It's some very, very good work that was done by the Nassau County Council of School Superintendents that asked the question, what if Long Island were the 51st state? If we were the 51st state, what would we look like educationally? And there's an awful lot of gold medals. There's an awful lot of first place statistics there. And that is a context, and I will mention this again when the commissioner gets here, that is a context that my colleagues and I spoke about in terms of preparing for today. So again, I'm now going to turn to Dr. Michael Nagler from Mineola. I'll let him introduce himself now that I've done that for him. And please excuse me, I don't want the commissioner to arrive and not know where we are or what's transpired thus far. So I'm going to go outside, and when I come back, I will bring with me the Commissioner of Education. Thank you. Michael?
Thank you, Tom. As Tom just said, my name is Michael Nagler. I'm the Superintendent of Mineola. I'm going to defer to my senior colleagues to my right. Jack doesn't like that reference, but it's well earned.
Hi, Jack Bierwirth. I'm the superintendent in Herricks. I also wear two other hats that are probably very relevant to tonight. One is that for the past, I guess, 2 years, I have been one of the 3 superintendents on the statewide APPR task force. In all the documents that come out, they talk about how we guided them and helped them and blah, 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 blah. The reality is that teachers, superintendents, principals, and school boards have been telling them that there were going to be problems. We were all on the same page. They were on another page. And sadly, virtually everything that the superintendents predicted has turned out to be true. We warned them about almost everything. And I thought maybe we were a little gloomy. Instead, we were actually a little optimistic. I also wear a second hat, which is that I am co-chair of the New York State Superintendent's Statewide Committee on Assessment. And they have not been listening to us either, wearing that hat. And last night, there was an emergency conference call with a deputy commissioner to talk about the field test memo that came out 2 weeks ago. And we tried to explain that that was a shock, particularly to those of us who are on the assessment committee, because it was our understanding that we were not going to be doing any standalone field tests anymore. So to be told in the middle of October that we were doing standalone field tests now and again in the spring, and furthermore to be told that there is in fact no comprehensive plan for all the field testing for the next 2 years. The deputy commissioner is going to try to make it up over the next 2 days because we've got another meeting with him Monday morning. But I must say I was profoundly disturbed to see that the state does not have a plan for how they're intending to do field testing. So a lot going on.
My name is Dan Brenner. I'm the superintendent in Roslyn. I only have one hat. I still only have one hat, and we are on. I'm a North Shore kid, born and raised. Grew up in Port Washington. Graduated from Schreiber High School. Worked in Great Neck for 17 great years, and now have been in Roslyn for unbelievably 8 years. And really, my focus and what I think we have tried to do since we've had these conversations, the 5 of us, is to kind of focus, what are we trying to get from today? Because it's nice to have dialogue, but dialogue without action is frankly just dialogue. And quite honestly, I think much of our frustration is there's been a lot of talking. If you're in superintendent's meetings, there's been a lot of whining. There's been a lot of frustration, but there's been very little action towards things that we think are important. And so I think our goal today is really to try to focus a conversation where hopefully the commissioner understands that we really have a difference of opinion, and we would like some acknowledgement around that. And for that, we would hope that the dialogue leads to action, maybe more dialogue, but to action. If, in fact, all we have here is, for lack of a better way, a political rhetoric, then this was really a wasted moment. And as much as I appreciate the opportunity, I think we're hoping for more than a wasted moment. So that's, that's, I think, the goal for us today.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Elementary district.
Exactly. I'm used to it. I'm spoiled now, so I have to have that. And I get spoiled because, I work with younger children most of the time, and we're fortunate to work with younger children, and they are so precious. And there's always the story about the young little boy who wasn't doing so well in school. And his dad was sitting there, and he was standing next to him, and he was sitting next to him. He was trying to help him, and the boy was frustrated. And he said, son, you're really not accomplishing everything you can accomplish in your life. You have to realize that you have to focus. And, by now you should have gotten over these math goals. You should have gotten over these hurdles that you're trying to accomplish. And we should be moving on. And the little boy looked up at his dad, and he looked him up and down. And he said like this, he said, Dad, by now, at your age, Robert Kennedy was president of the United States. and so, when you look at it that way, it's amazing that the pressure still lay upon us. And I thank Senator Martins and Mrs. Schimel for holding this forum. Senator Martins, I have to say this, he is always available to us as educators. He's in our schools. He comes, and he doesn't come by for photo ops. He comes by to do the real work and see what's going on in the classrooms. And he says, Al, what do you guys need? What can help you? So I thank both of you for putting this forum together. And as it was said before, said by Danny, hopefully some real work will come out of this forum. Not just lip service. Hopefully we can actually sit down at a table and get some work done. I thank all of you for coming out because you're putting our children first and putting this important and making sure this forum is heard. You're doing a great job in your districts. We're graduating 97% of our children. 90% of our children are reaching their goals. Very close to here, less than 2-3 miles to the Queens border, about 47%. So we're doing the job well. We should be recognized for it. We should be lauded for it, and we should have a pass for some of the things that are going on. And that's why we're here. Thank you.
Now that we've had our introductions, and I do want to take the opportunity to thank superintendents who have agreed to sit on the panel, participate in this panel, and I think it's very important what Dr. Brenner said very eloquently. We don't want this to be just words or wind. there is a call to action, and we should have, hopefully, a plan by the time we're done here, or at least the rudiments of some course of action. Dr. Nagler, I mean, you passed pretty quickly to Dr. Bierwirth. Tell us about your experience in Mineola.
Better. I echo all the sentiments of my colleagues. You know, Mineola is a little different than Elmont and Herricks and Great Neck and Roslyn. And I was surprised myself. I've been in the district for 13 years. When the high school principal put up our passing rate on AP exams compared to the rest of the state, I had to pause, because we have an open enrollment. Any child that wishes to challenge the course in any course can do it. And our passing rate 3 or above is 81%. Compared to the state average of 54, I really stopped, because my parents are constantly comparing us to Great Neck and Roslyn. And say, well, how come you don't have those numbers? And we're a different community, but we aspire our kids to be whatever they want to be. And we give them the resources and the opportunity to do so. And our numbers prove that. And I agree with my colleagues, when we're faced to invest our time and energy in things that we know are not benefiting our kids, and we're all dutiful in wanting to comply, and we're stuck with this dilemma of compliance and what's right for our communities. And that's why our frustration level is through the roof. And we would like answers to the questions instead of dodging the questions of, why can't this happen? Why can't there be exceptions made? I recently, I think I'm the only one on the panel that has an approved APPR and went through the process of having it approved very recently. And it was amazing that I was able to do it in a day, literally, well, actually I should say less than a day. From 3 o'clock in the afternoon until 5 minutes to midnight, we were able to get a plan approved through the state. When working with the union to get it done, but it amazed me how different every plan looks. And if you go and spend some time, which I had to do, looking at the plans that had been approved, they're completely different. There is not a lot of rhyme or reason to why one was approved or one is better than another. We hope it's because those communities are all different and they're treating them all differently. My instinct tells me that that's not the case. There's a lot of latitude in how it's done, and my feeling is that will bring a lot of difference in how teachers are rated. Because the bottom line, if this system is supposed to level the field and give a rating that's similar to all teachers, that's not going to happen when you have 500 different APPR plans. 700? 700? 700. That's why he's senior.
I can speak for myself, but maybe Jack, you can jump in as well. I have a vantage point of Long Island. I've lived on Long Island most of my adult life. I've raised 2 children, so I see, and I have the opportunity to visit both Nassau and Suffolk schools, and have worked with superintendents from both counties. So I see what's going on in Long Island. And again, New York State being a very diverse state, one of the most diverse states in the union, you would agree. Is Long Island, and let's talk about Long Island, both counties, an outlier in terms, I've seen that document before, and I applaud that document, and it's not surprising to me. But in terms of how this attitude of one size fits all, are there other parts of the state that, counties that should feel the same way you do? Or is this, this need to homogenize testing? What I'm trying to get at is a lot of times carving Long Island out is a concern. I think what is the message here? Carve Long Island out, or one size fits all doesn't work, and we have to allow, you know, each county's district to settle and go forth, you know, to prove their mettle.
Is this a Jeopardy question?
Yeah. Yeah, ring in. Ring in, Dr. Brenner.
Because Jack was going. See, I could see Jack. I'm just gonna speak as a resident. I did. It's like, as a resident of Westchester County, I would suggest to you that their issues are identical to the issues of Long Island, and I would also suggest that there are a number of very fine, very high-achieving school districts in the capital region. That, you know, and so I think there are districts throughout. I think what's probably unique based on this data is the breadth of the number of districts. And I think also that what we have attempted to do is carve out a conversation around a group of schools to try to find a voice. But I don't think there's anybody in this panel that would sit and say, treat Long Island different than you would treat Westchester County, the capital region, where there are excellent schools, and high-achieving schools. Excellent's a poor word. High-achieving schools. I don't think anyone would say that.
Thank you.
Across the state who would answer your question of one size fits all, much the way we would, but for very different reasons. And I can probably best illustrate that by talking about a district that I will leave nameless for the moment. And I can't remember whether they have 234 kids K-12 or 243 kids K-12. They are actually a very high-achieving school district. But the issue of APPR is killing them. They have a superintendent who is also the building principal, who is also the business official, who is also the various department chairs. And some of the sort of inanity of this can be best illustrated by the fact that for 4 months, the state couldn't answer as to how they should file their APPR form because it has 4 signature places: board president, superintendent, president of the Teachers Association, and president of the Administrators Association. Well, she's the only administrator in the school district. And they said she can't sign twice. So, I mean, and she's not the only district like that in the state. But for 4 months, they couldn't file their plan. So I offered to have Karen Hughes, who is the president of the Administrators Association in Herricks, negotiate with her on her own behalf so that Karen could sign it as the representative for the blankety-blank school district. They are really concerned that they do not have the resources. And as you well know, there are districts upstate that are, even though a district cannot go bankrupt, that are basically bankrupt. And they are taking, at the same time, they are cutting staff and cutting programs that are required to meet state regulations for the minimum quality of education, are being forced to spend considerable amounts of money on APPR. So they look at this as New York City and the Big Five being foisted off on small rural school districts. They understand that we're objecting, but they see us as having considerably more money than they do. So the one-size-fits-all question is a very powerful one for much of the state.
You're absolutely right. Thank you. I have a colleague from upstate New York. She represents the far north, and she often uses the example that in one of her high schools, the valedictorian and the child with the lowest grade point average in the class is the same person. And let's think about that and what that means for a school district that has to meet all of these requirements. And again, we'll use the term and continue to use the term, the one size fits all. When there are similarities between the Big Five school districts, but after that, to Dr. Nagler's point, if every system that is being approved is different because it recognizes that every school district is different, then what's the point? Another question that I'll throw out there, and this is a concern that I hear from parents, from educators, if we're going to focus on testing, and if the purpose of education is to inspire creativity, what are your goals for continuing to try and inspire that kind of creativity and continue to inspire Intel winners and continue to inspire the future innovators of tomorrow in a system that relies so heavily on testing? How do we move that needle forward, either in the current system, or how would you like to see it changed so that we can continue to have the incredible successes we've had over the years?
I will say that one of the difficulties that the assessments pose to us as school districts is doing just what Senator Martin says and keeping the arts moving forward and keeping those types of programs moving forward where we allow children to have the opportunity to think outside of the box a little bit. You know, I go back to when I was in school, and there were children of all races and all colors and of all creeds who were there with me in school, and some of them were bright, some of them didn't have all the answers, some of them looked confused most of the time. And then when you look at how that mosaic moved forward, and you look at some were talented in art and some were fantastic musicians and then ended up being professional musicians, and ended up being wonderful artists, ended up being firemen and policemen, and think about someone who may have, we're ready now? Okay. Oh, okay. No. but I always mention, you think about, only because we've known each other so long, that's why. But when you think about the child who may not have been as successful in school as we would like them to be, the child who didn't excel, but that child grows up to be a fireman, but it's because he was inspired by a teacher in his district, and he runs into a building somewhere and saves a life. Is his education valued? Of course it is. Of course it is. It means even more sometimes. So you have to always try to expand those programs where we have children who are allowed to be creative and to think outside of the box. And I'm going to stop now because Tom's giving me the look. But I agree we have to continue those programs going and have to push the arts forward at all costs.
Well, if what we engaged in before was a soft start, I guess this is the hard start, and we'll start the program again. But I do want to just mention the only reason Al Harper knows the look is that my son is a 6th grade teacher in his district, and I'm sure that Brian has demonstrated, the look from Dad. Welcome to the Great Neck School District, and specifically to Great Neck Middle School. I'd like to thank several people for making today happen, starting off with Senator Martins and Assemblywoman Schimel. Thank you also to the Great Neck North Middle School administrative team for accommodating us here today. They are Principal Jim Welsh and Assistant Principals Gina Cardilano and Jerry Cozine. I'd like to note that the refreshments in the back were provided by our 2 assistant principals, cooked at home, and it's just another thing that makes this district and this school a very special place. Especially to Gina, thank you for the scones. And if anybody ever sees Gina, let her know I gave her a shout out for the scones. I also thank all of you, my colleagues who are present today, and members of the Board of Education. But most importantly, I'd like to thank Commissioner King for being here today. We appreciate your hard work and the time you are spending with us. That said, I will confess that we have struggled to find the right format and the right tone for today. As I said, Dr. King, we are appreciative of your being here and are respectful of you and your office. But, as you can imagine, we have concerns and have experienced a sense of disconnect with the State Education Department of late. By way of a few questions and some dialogue to follow with our panel, we hope to be able to express our concerns, find some solutions, and reconnect. Those might be high hopes for a 1-hour visit, but we are a hopeful bunch. And it is a characteristic that has gotten us to where we are now, and sometimes what gets us through the day. The panelists who joined me today are, should I do that? I think everybody's met the panelists, and Dr. King, you met the panelists, you know who they are, so I'll just thank my colleagues for participating today. And what we're going to start with is just by leaving a slide up for us to contextualize our discussion today, and I did give Dr. King a copy of it. It's something that I think he has seen before, which asks the provocative question, what if Long Island were the 51st state? Where would we be educationally? And I love discussing that. I won't discuss it here, but I love discussing that and being a part of that picture with all the rest of Long Island. But before we do anything, I'd like to ask Dr. King to say a few words, and it is my honor to introduce the Commissioner of Education for the State of New York, Dr. John B. King.
Thanks very much. I'm pleased to be here. Sorry that we are running behind. We've had a full day of events, starting with Kings Park and South Huntington and Huntington. So we've had News Day. You can imagine they had a question or two for us. So we've had a busy day. Let me say a few framing remarks, and maybe I'll start just with the context of the data here. You know, there's no question that we have a diverse state with diverse levels of performance across our school districts and even within our school districts. We have a diverse state in terms of the financial constraints or opportunities that districts face, and all of our policy discussions have to happen in the context of that diversity, and it is a challenge to talk about the state in a way that makes sense given that diversity, whether one is talking about what we spend per pupil or talking about academic performance. It is a reality that there is a lot of diversity underneath the averages. And the danger is in a culture, particularly a media culture, where we have to talk in sound bites, unfortunately. Oftentimes the sound bites mask the diversity. There's a lot of good things happening on Long Island. That's clear. I spend a fair amount of time traveling around the state, have made a number of visits to Long Island. It's my second time in the Great Neck School District. I'm often impressed by the great things that I see, the rigor of instruction that students are receiving, the breadth of opportunities that students are exposed to. And at the same time, even on Long Island, even if Long Island was the 51st state, there are pockets of challenge, and there are communities that are struggling to provide high-quality educational opportunities for their students, and there are communities that are on the edge because of, at times, because of rapid change in the community, at times because of financial challenges, but there are communities where the performance is still not ideal. And so there's a danger, whether we're talking about all the reasons we are great or all the challenges we need to meet. Again, it's always important to try to speak to the range. We do know that as a state and a country, we face a real challenge around college and career readiness. The schools that are on the U.S. News and World Report list, the schools that are sending, that are graduating Intel finalists are in one place. But that isn't necessarily representative where all of our state is or wherever all of our country is. We know even at the community colleges on Long Island, some 40% or more of entering students end up in remedial courses. That's a challenge that we see statewide, and nearly 50% of entering students in two-year colleges are in remedial courses. And in our high needs communities, those numbers can be even higher, 70, 80%. So we have work to do. We know that even in some of our strongest schools across the state, there are pockets of underperformance, whether it's demographic pockets, whether it's our students with disabilities, whether in some cases it's newly arrived English language learners. In other cases, there are school districts where students are doing quite well, but there are places where students could be doing more or taking on greater challenges, whether it's advanced placement work or international baccalaureate work or tackling college courses earlier. So there's always work to do. One great thing about education, I've felt this way as a teacher and a principal and now in this role, there's always more work to do to try and make the best opportunities available to students. I'm eager for tonight's conversation. People will tell you, and Jack will certainly tell you, I can take it. So if there are tough questions, that's okay. I think it's always important to have conversations that are in a tone of respect and mutual understanding. I am certain that everyone walked into the room with a shared commitment to educational excellence, not just for some kids, but for all kids, and that's the spirit in which I think we should proceed. A couple final points. Certainly, In the current moment, the changes in standards to the college and career-ready standards are a shared challenge, not just in New York, but across the country. Some 45 states, 3 territories, the Department of Defense, schools have all adopted the new Common Core standards precisely because they are mapped backwards from college and career success, because they are mapped backwards from the kind of work students need to do to tackle the IB curriculum, to tackle AP courses, to succeed in college and careers. And those require shifts in instruction. Some of those make people happy, some of them make people nervous, but I believe they are the right shifts. There are many schools represented in this room that are already doing those things, already doing lots of writing with evidence, already teaching a curriculum that incorporates both fiction and a fair amount of nonfiction, which we know students have to be prepared to tackle when they get to college and careers. Districts that are already doing a good job ensuring that students have deep conceptual understanding of math. But not every classroom, not every school, not every kid, and so there's work to do. There's also, I know, a lot of anxiety around the teacher and principal evaluation system. Certainly in the conversation we just had with another similar room, there's lots of anxiety, understandable. I think at its heart, the important thing to emphasize is that the teacher and principal evaluation system is about supporting good instruction. For some districts, there's not a lot to change. They're already doing principal observations of teachers. They already have clear academic goals for each course and a way to think about whether students are meeting those goals. For other districts, they haven't been doing that. They haven't had the principal in classrooms. They haven't had a common language at the school or district level around good instruction. And there's a lot of work to do to implement the APPR. So folks are at very different places, and that's just another part of our state's diversity and the diverse context in which we proceed. So with that, I look forward to your questions, comments, so forth.
Not much of the rest of tonight is choreographed. We're going to pose some questions to the commissioner. We've developed some questions along the way. Not quite sure what that order is going to be, except for who will go first. Because Jack arrived last, he was volunteered to ask the first question. I will turn to Jack Bierwirth. And then I'm not quite sure how the questions will follow, and I hope the audience and the commissioner will allow us to figure that out along the way and try to find our way through this to make some sense of it, and as I said before, to try to reach some solutions together.
Commissioner, I've got 2. One big picture, one much more mundane. The international data on effective schools, Andrea Schleicher's work, OECD, some of the most powerful stuff I've seen, certainly the most powerful in my career. Is very clear that the school systems that are the most effective around the world share 4 characteristics. Hiring teachers from among the ranks of top college graduates, setting high expectations for all students, intensive professional development to improve the skills and knowledge of educators throughout their career, and early and intensive intervention in dysfunctional situations. My concern is that much of what we're doing at the moment in New York State bears little resemblance to that there is relatively little overlap. I don't see rating and sorting teachers and principals as professional development. It may lead to that, but I don't see it as professional development. The second, more mundane question is the question of over-testing. The cost, the expense, the time, the effort, the amount of time that it takes away from instruction. Unfortunately, that issue has been once again pushed to the forefront by the email from Ken Wagner about field testing in October. And that came at the time that most schools were giving all of their baseline testing for APPR and telling kids that we got to do this. It's not about you. It's about us. Once we get through, we can move on with instruction. I was on a call last night with Ken Slentz. My sense is that there is not really a comprehensive plan for field testing. And, we'd really like to work with you together because there is really anger, frustration, and concern out there. And I am concerned that it will undermine the quality of the field testing. So people will end up doing a lot of work for nothing. So 2 questions. Take them in either order.
All right, there we go. Let's start with the top performing countries. So one of the challenges, and as you know, of those international comparisons is there's lots of things that are different about those countries as well. I was just talking with someone who just gotten back from Finland who was commenting on the variability in the quality of instruction that she observed across Finnish classrooms, but the striking commonality in the resources available not only to schools but to students. And we could count off a long list of differences between us and the highest performing countries around how we deal with health insurance in this country, how we deal with housing in this country, how we deal with economic equity issues, how we deal with early childhood in comparison to some countries, although Finland is one of those that starts school later. So the danger of international comparisons is always the risk of reifying the list and assuming that the things that made someone appear at the top of the list could easily be identified and replicated elsewhere. That said, I take the point that those are 4 good things to do, and I would argue that in many ways we are focused on doing exactly these things. We are changing how we certify teachers, what requirements are placed on teacher preparation candidates and principal preparation candidates to raise the bar on content knowledge, which is clearly critical to teacher success, as well as to raise the bar on pedagogical skills and to increase the amount of time that teachers are spending in classrooms prior to their arrival in the profession. A challenge that we have is that historically, not just in New York but around the country, we have not only had a low bar for enrollment in education programs, but we have vastly over-prepared educators in many, many fields. For example, last year on Long Island, there were many thousands of students who graduated with elementary certification, when in fact, there was, I imagine, you all could confirm this, probably a net loss in elementary school jobs last year. Certainly many of those students are going without employment. And so we've got to do a better job both raising the standards, but also I think those institutions that prepare teachers and principals have to do a better job matching the supply they prepare with the demand that exists, particularly around teachers who are prepared to work with English language learners and students with disabilities and so forth. In terms of expectations, the Common Core was constructed in part by international comparisons. There's a great paper by Bill Schmidt that talks about how closely the Common Core math standards align with the math standards of our most successful international competitors. The work that the authors of the Common Core did was precisely to try to map backwards from the standards that our competitors use and the standards that are necessary to succeed in international baccalaureate programs or advanced placement programs. In fact, I was just talking in an earlier meeting today about visiting Comac High School last year and talking with the IB students. They have a very strong and large IB program, and talking with a group of IB students and asking what are the skills that middle school kids and elementary school kids should be focused on if we wanted to have more kids in the IB program here. And what they described literally was item after item that is embedded in the Common Core standards, both in terms of reading nonfiction, the opportunities to write with evidence from text, the importance of conceptual understanding in math. So in terms of expectations, and the expectations we said, I think the Common Core is headed in the direction of preparing us to better compete with our international competitors. On professional development, and this ties to your comment about rating and sorting, the evaluation system isn't about rating and sorting. That is a political argument from my perspective, not the impetus for the evaluation system nor the educational goal. It is precisely to support differentiated professional development, which I submit is very difficult to do if one cannot identify models of excellence and who is struggling and who needs help. So we may have a different view about about evaluation systems, but ultimately, the merit of an evaluation system is its ability to inform professional development and professional growth. On the issue of over-testing, you know, we have in New York a tradition of testing that dates back into the mid to late 19th century, the Regents exams. I was just reading the other day Robert Kennedy's comments about the critical importance of assessments during the discussions about the original Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Assessments, as everyone knows in the room, are an inherent part of the educational process. The question is, are you assessing the right things, and are assessments informing instruction in the right ways? And we, as you know, Jack, have been working to try to improve our state assessments. They will reflect in 3rd through 8th grade the Common Core this year. We'll make changes to the Regents exams over the next couple of years. We are working with a consortium of 23-ish other states on the development of next generation assessments that will take advantage of computer-based testing to try to do more performance-based assessment, funded in part by Race to the Top assessment grant. So we're trying to make sure the assessments get at the right things, the skills that will put students on the trajectory to AP and IB and so forth, and college and career success. In terms of field testing, you know, the field test this year will be split into 2 sessions. Some people will take the field test in the fall, some will take it in the spring. If you look across the country, some people field test in the fall, some people field test in the spring. We'll have it split. Schools that participate in the fall won't participate in the spring, and we'll evaluate whether fall field testing is something that people ultimately prefer. In the past, and this is perhaps essential to the nature of my job, in the past, people have said, you know, we shouldn't do field testing in the spring, we should really do it in the fall. It'd be really helpful to do field testing in the fall. So now we're doing field testing in the fall, and people say, you know, we really should do field testing in the spring. So that's okay. We're dividing it between fall and spring. We'll see how that goes. We'll get feedback as we always do around field testing. Ideally, we wouldn't do standalone field testing for multiple choice at all. What most states do is they print lots of forms of the test and they embed all of the multiple choice questions. We in New York only do 4 forms. It's a long-standing practice tied to resources. We are one of the lower spending states on assessment. We only do 4 forms. We have to do standalone field testing. It's the reality of our testing program. When we get to computer-based testing, that will hopefully eliminate the need for standalone multiple choice field testing, although we'll probably always have a need for some standalone field tests of open response questions, questions where students write out essays or explain how they solved a math problem. Very hard to embed those because of the time they add. You know, Lorna Lewis made a similar point in our last meeting to one you made about clarity around the plan. We've got lots of information on Engage New York about the timeline for implementing the Common Core, changes to the assessment system. You know, could we provide more information faster? Yes. I think arguably in the last year we've made very significant strides on communication, whether it's Engage New York or the resources we put out directly to educators. We'll continue to work on communications and trying to get things to people earlier, faster. We have exam dates out earlier this year than we have in the past years, and we're going to keep working on that. That's a fair criticism and concern. So you asked a lot. I tried to answer. I'm sure you have a long list of additional questions under there as well, but thanks.
I thought I was next.
I have just a quick comment, a prepared question, and a question of that before I ask my prepared question, how good a sense of humor do you have? Because if you have a good sense of humor, I'm going to go with one question, and if you're a little bit tentative, I'm going the other direction. Okay, well, did I mention I worked in Great Neck? Okay, so let me start by saying that I had the pleasure of traveling to China this summer and visiting schools in China. And in the process of visiting them, I visited the top high schools in Beijing. One is the experimental high school and the other is number 4, and met with the principals, ostensibly to go learn about their system. And what I was astonished to hear was how much they wanted to learn about our system. And one after another said, we're great receptacles, but we don't know how to teach creativity. And when our kids come to the States, they are at a huge disadvantage. And all they want from us is to teach their students, when they come, ways to manage and navigate, because they don't have that piece. Here's what they do a lot of. They test a lot. And they're they're high stakes testing like nowhere else. And so I think the fear of my colleagues, and I think many people in the room, is that as we move forward with the need to measure and measure better, that we have in some ways crossed over from the need to measure better to over-testing. And what ends up happening from our perspective, I think, is we're on the ground looking at kids, watching 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade kids, not 2nd, maybe down the road, but at least at this point, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade kids losing sleep the night before around exams, because in our communities, performance is so important. And there is something psychologically inappropriate when it comes to that. And it is an unintended consequence, I am sure, from the state, but it's a real consequence. And so that's my comment. Now I'm going to try to make you laugh, and we'll see how that goes. I hope I do better than I just did. I want to talk just, if I can, about the APPR system, because I'm going to start with a thank you. And you probably don't hear this a lot, but from at least our perspective, I think there's real strengths because it has empowered our district to observe teachers in ways that in the past we may not have. And it has forced a conversation with our unions and their leadership to, I think, make more meaningful, does that mean I'm done? Yep. Yeah, so make more meaningful observation moments. And I really think it's going to help us make our teachers better, and as a result, I think it's going to make the students better learners. So from that perspective, I think that's a real win. And frankly, would not have happened, at least in our district, had this initiative not come down. But I'm sure you know there's the but, and here's going to be the attempt at humor, so hang in there. If this was part of an evaluation process, I could only give you 60 points on the thank you, because we're just dealing with the observation. On a heady chart that utilizes state exams and exam data, you'd still need 15 points to be effective and 31 points to be highly effective. So what do you want to be? Highly effective. So if you can answer this next question, I'm going to give you highly effective. That's where we go. If differentiation in education is a prominent theme, and one that I think we all embrace, and one that, in fact, you noted, and I don't think there's anybody in the room that wouldn't say it's a true quality of a top flight teacher. It's what we aspire all our teachers to have. And we're looking for our teachers to embrace that. And we move and we look at our school districts, and the state says to us that in essence there will be no differentiation as it applies school district to school district. That in essence what we're doing is one set of tests for one group, for all groups of kids, is blanketed, across the entire state. It seems to us that the same differentiation that we would expect from teachers in a classroom would be a fair expectation for school districts. So, as an example, if the career and college readiness benchmark is 75 for, I always forget, I always get them mixed up for English, and 80 for math. And in Roslyn, we're achieving a target of, for both, you know, well above 80%. Why would we need to continue to test those groups of kids? Doesn't it make sense? Because in fact, for us, that's not college and career readiness. That's, and we have all our algebra kids all our kids in 8th grade take algebra in 8th grade. So they're getting 80% are going above college and career readiness in 8th grade. So I guess I'm here to say, couldn't we differentiate in ways that we assess our own so that maybe we could test less once we passed the threshold of what the state is asking for? Because I agree with the state, and I applaud the efforts the state makes as it applies to the disadvantaged, because they need support, and I think we need to give them that support. And the ones that aren't meeting that, we need to support even more. But for those that are, why are we seem to be caught in the spin cycle? So those are the two questions. That was a long question. I'm sorry. I should have pushed my button out. I should have done that. Let me get up. I'm sorry.
So thank you for the positive feedback. I appreciate that on the observations and the power of the conversations about teaching practice. That's very encouraging. The assessment, you raised several related questions on assessment that I think are complex, not just for New York, but for the country, for any country. One challenge is the question of commonality. What is the common measure of learning? And ought we to have, as a democratic society, a common measure for learning? And this is the very issue that Robert Kennedy raised when he was talking about the role of assessments in equity. And there's a real challenge there. You know, there's the question of, are there places where there's very high performance for most but not all, and those who are not performing are in a particular subgroup? One of the things I think that was important about No Child Left Behind that has gotten too little credit is that there are school districts around the state, and not only around this state, around the country, I should say, school districts around the country, that prior to No Child Left Behind had pockets of students who were systematically ignored. And it was the requirement of a common assessment with disaggregated results that changed the conversation. I think particularly of the Southwest and Latino students in the Southwest. You know, the civil rights community, the Latino civil rights community, and advocates for English language learners played a key role in the disaggregation of results in No Child Left Behind, precisely because there were schools that would say, well, our average performance is fantastic, and that was enough, when in fact, beneath the surface, there were pockets of Latino students who were unserved and unattended to by the school district. So one challenge for any system is, how do you ensure that everybody meets the minimum threshold, whatever that minimum threshold is? And that is a complex philosophical and political question. I, for one, believe there is virtue in a democratic society coming to a common understanding of what a reasonable assessment is of academic skills. And I think as you look across, whether it's our international competitors or Massachusetts, which is the state that leads in the NAEP, having assessments that reflect a common understanding of an educational vision can play a valuable and important role. That said, differentiation, I think, is important. I would argue we have a pretty differentiated high school system now. Students take AP exams, they take IB exams. Some students take lots of Regents exams. Some students take just a few Regents exams. I I worry sometimes that there is too much difference between the high school experiences of students in some high schools and others. There are some schools that offer 20 APs and some that offer none. So I worry that we have almost too much diversity in terms of what the possible routes through high school are, and that some students have a route that won't necessarily lead them to much of a destination. Are we over-testing? I'm sort of skeptical about that claim. I know that's the current political vogue to make that claim. When you contrast with schools of a decade or 2 decades ago, it's very hard to find that schools where assessments weren't given on a regular basis, because assessment is inherent to education. I continue to believe it is about the real question is, what is the quality of that assessment? Is it assessing the right things? Because assessment is inherent in education. The other issue is that I think oftentimes we conflate the issue of teaching to the test with the existence of the test. The issue of teaching to the test is I would argue, near fatal pedagogical error. If what we mean by that is we're going to hand out worksheets of passages and multiple choice questions and have students practice those every day, I don't think that translates into better academic outcomes. And indeed, better academic outcomes are achieved through rich instruction. Now, one way to rectify that is to try to get the assessments closer to what rich instruction looks like. So have assessments that require more writing, more critical thinking, more application of math skills, more extended tasks, and that's precisely the work we're engaged in the changes we're making to the assessment system. But the other is to get the instructional core right. Many districts and many schools, districts represented in this room, I think, do try to get the instructional core right. And do find if you have a rich curriculum that asks students to read challenging texts and to write frequently about those texts, you can prepare students to succeed at quite high levels without worksheets that are sort of a low-level drill. One point about your China example. I worry about, the education I feel like is littered with false dichotomies. Straw man claims put forward by warring camps. In the end, it is very hard to be a creative thinker if you do not have good core skills. If you don't understand fractions and you can't do fractions, you can't do advanced math, period. And so the work on fractions and understanding fractions relies in part on, do you know how to multiply and divide? Right? Core skills and fluency in core skills is a building block to later success. So I worry about creating a sort of a false choice between creativity on the one hand and mastery of content or fluency and foundational skills on the other. I actually think good instruction, I think you would agree, good instruction aspires to do both. They're not mutually exclusive, exactly.
Can I just
As it applies to assessments, and as you talk about assessments and instruction, I think we all would agree that fundamentally a good assessment is one that can be reviewed. And one of the things that has happened, I would assume because of the security, is that the tests don't come back. And so they become high-stake tests with a number, but not high-stake tests with the ability to review. And it stops becoming a learning moment and becomes just a pure assessment moment. And I would say, from the educator's perspective, it would be far more useful, it used to be that way, it would be far more useful if we were able to go back and peel back at the exams and look at them, because that becomes instructive to the teachers and it becomes really instructive to the kids if we can review it. So I would ask you at least to maybe reconsider that in the process, because we've got a huge amount of feedback from teachers saying, you know, all it's become is this moment of them showing up, taking the test, and finding a number. Sorry.
Just real quickly on that, you know, in our current assessment contract, the items are secure. We're not we won't be releasing the items. As you know, one of the great dilemmas of assessment investments is if you release all of the items, that means you have to replenish all of the items every time. And you also create the risk of actually intensifying teaching to the test, because the objective becomes, well, how do I prepare students to answer a question that looks like this, which is different from how do I ensure that students master the standard. So I think there are arguments to be made either way on the benefits and risks of release of items. We certainly have put out sample items, even of what the Common Core assessments will look like this spring. I think we will continue to try to put out lots of sample items. We are also building curricular materials that will embed some of the kinds of performance tasks that we hope will be included in the PARC assessments down the road when we move to computer-based testing. It may be as we move to PARC that there's opportunity to release more items. But that is a dilemma of the assessment development world, that there is a cost trade-off to release of items, and there is a pedagogical risk to release of items. But your point is well taken, and one that we certainly are aware of.
Sure, man.
Thank you, Al. I just want to, excuse me, refine Dan's question a little bit. I think the state assessments and assessing the Common Core for students is one piece. And the advent of the APPR has brought on a whole new wave of testing that I don't think was an intended consequence. And in essence, we're testing children to rate adults in subjects that have never been tested. And because we're locally negotiating how teachers are working with their slow assessments, I mean, in my district, we're testing kids in every subject. The testing window in September is the whole month, because the pre-assessments are in music and art, in home and career skills. And I know I've heard you say before that we could always use the English assessment for those subjects. The unions are not warm to that, and to create this whole barrage of tests and kids in every subject to begin a year has proved daunting. And I know in other districts we're doing the same thing. So when we talk about over-testing, it's not just from the state perspective, it's the 20 and 20, it's every subject. And that, I think, is where we start to challenge the logic, to say, if we're doing fine overall as a district and we're exceeding state standards in multiple areas, we're not asking to be excused from the state's baseline of what a highly successful student should have. It's everything else. I mean, why are we testing kids in art?
So I started a little bit different place on the SLOs, on the student learning objectives. One is you don't have to do pre-tests. You can use prior performance. The question for SLOs is one that I think is fundamental to good instruction, which is, for any class, what is it you hope to achieve this year, and how will you know if you've achieved it? And whether it's music class or art class or 7th grade social studies or a 12th grade intro to psychology course, the question, what do I hope to achieve this year and how will I know, ought to be the question that the teacher asks before the first day of instruction. Now, SLOs requires that in order to answer that, how do you know, that you have some way that you gather where students are now, and then some way where you gather where they are at the end. Now, if a district chooses to do that through pre-tests, that's a locally made decision. It doesn't have to be pre-test, could be prior performance. You're right, it could be assessment scores in other subjects, but it also could be how they do last year in that subject. Right? So last year's finals could be used as the starting point for determining prior academic performance. There are lots of options for how you determine the goal. So I do worry that the pretest component, that's a local choice. And one of the things that was true of this law from the beginning is that the law left 80% of the decisions to local districts and their bargaining units. And a wise superintendent said to me at the time, it'd be better if the state just set all the elements of the evaluation system, but then we'd blame you for all those too. So his point was, if you say this is going to be all comprised of local choices, you can be confident that that will be criticized. And if you say we're dictating the one way to do it, that will be criticized. So that's okay. In the end, I have to say I am troubled by the notion that it is unfair or wrong or problematic to ask that every educator start a course with a goal and a sense of how they'll know if students achieve that goal, which is at its heart what the student learning objective process is about. So, the pretest question, that's one that districts and their bargaining units will decide. And maybe over time, as people grow increasingly comfortable with the evaluation system, not just in New York, but in the other, nearly 30, maybe more states who are implementing similar evaluation systems, maybe the mood will shift around the need to do pre-test, post-test as opposed to an agreement about prior academic performance. But I hear the worry. I would also say in most classes, there is some form of assessment. And the question is, how do we organize in a way that we can have a common understanding across the district around what it is we seek to achieve in that course. And I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily that the 7th grade social studies teachers have to get around a table and ask, hey, how do our 7th grade social studies assessments look different? And what is it that we in this district believe about 7th grade social studies?
I think what's going on.
Yeah, I guess so there may just be a disagreement, and I can accept that. I guess what I struggle with, and I've heard this several times today, on the 60% observations I've heard from a number of people, we already do that. Our principals already observe teachers. We have a common rubric, and everyone speaks from it, and the rubric reflects the New York State teaching standards, right? So then those people say, but APPR is making us do things that are very different. And I say, well, 60% requires that the principal observe the teacher and use a common rubric that aligns with the New York State teaching standards. So tell me what's different. And they say, well, okay, maybe it's not really different. And they say, well, the assessment part, that's making us do everything different. And I say, okay, well, did teachers have an objective for the year? Yes. Did they use an assessment to measure how kids made progress towards that objective? Yes. And I say, well, so now, will they have an assessment to measure how kids meet the objective? Yes. I say, okay, so then tell me what's the thing we have to do radically different? And they'll say, well, we have to do the same thing across the district. So, well, is it a bad thing that the 7th grade, towards my prior example, is it a bad thing that the 7th grade social studies teachers are talking about a common vision for what's to be achieved for 7th grade social studies? And they say, no, I guess not. So I guess the thing I struggle with is if the answer is we're already doing it, great. Then yes, there is the tedium of filling out the review room and describing what rubric you use and how frequently you do the observations and which assessments you use. And I accept that is a laborious process. But if you're already doing it, then that's a laborious process about documenting good practice that hopefully colleagues in other districts can learn from. Now, if people aren't doing it and it requires them to do it, that's the point, and I think that's okay. If people aren't doing regular observations, if principals aren't doing regular observations, they should be. And if people don't have a clear academic goal for each course and a way to measure it, they should have that. So I guess I'm struggling with we're already doing it, but the requirement is terribly onerous. I'm trying to get to the heart of the requirement that is onerous.
I can give you one example. 8th grade algebra was mentioned. You and I have both talked about this. 8th grade math teachers are being evaluated on the state math test, which is supposed to predict, but does a terrible job of predicting how well kids will do in algebra a year later. You know the Rockville Center statistics, the difference between those. It's true for us too. Our teachers in 8th grade algebra are going to be evaluated on the 8th grade math test, not on algebra. And that's a real problem. They're going to be evaluated that way in Great Neck, Roslyn, all of us. I want, and our board members who are sitting in the back, want those 8th grade algebra teachers to focus on algebra, not the 8th grade math test. And yet, when the state does the 0 to 20 or 0 to 25 calculation, it's going to be the 8th grade math test, not algebra, that's going to count. So you wanted a specific example, and that's a specific example that's been raised over and over and over again. And I can give you some others, but I mean, I think that's probably one of the, earth science, that's probably one of the best. Sorry.
I mean, we could probably do this for a while, but I'll say on the 8th grade math, I mean, we're changing the 8th grade math test this year to reflect the Common Core, and in the following year, the algebra exam will change to reflect the 9th grade expectations of the Common Core. So acceleration is always going to be a complexity of the system. So if students are doing the 9th grade Common Core work in 8th grade instead of the 8th grade Common Core work, that's an acceleration problem that works backwards. It's probably best addressed in the long run by computer-based testing that will allow us to have more open-ended work that might allow us for better measurement of skills across multiple levels. But the disconnect between 8th grade and 9th grade is something, as you know, is changing this very spring with an 8th grade test that reflects the Common Core, and the following year with a 9th grade typical algebra test that reflects the Common Core. So that seems solvable, and we actually are on a path to solve it, as you know. I mean, earth science was raised. If kids are doing earth science in 8th grade, then that can be counted into the evaluation process. So at the more granular level, and you know, Jackie, you and I spend a lot of time together, and I am always happy to talk with you about the details on any one of these items. I don't know how fruitful that is for the rest of the room, but on item by item, I do think that there are some places where there are undoubtedly going to be wrinkles about that particular year's assessment and how it works, and we can talk through those. I don't think they pose an insurmountable obstacle, but the 8th grade math algebra disconnect not only is one that I agree with, it's one that we have people working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, who you've spent time with, who are nationally renowned assessment experts to resolve. So on that, I think we're making every effort to resolve it.
Example.
Right.
And I think there's a number of very specific
examples.
Yeah.
And so what I would appreciate, and you know this about me, is I will sit with you as long as you want, wherever you want, and work through example by example. We've done it before. I'm happy to do it again. What I was raising was a broader challenge, which is the incompatibility between the argument, we already do this, and it's horribly onerous to do. And so there is an incompatibility between those. And I agree, if we can identify granular places where that's true, we should try and reconcile them, and I'm certainly open to that.
Commissioner, thank you again for coming down. I'm going to change the, line of questioning just a little bit. We prepared questions for you that were of common issues to all of our districts, and then we also were able to maybe slip one or two in that were individualized towards our districts itself. So I'm going to try to get one in there that's individualized a little bit towards Elmont, but a common issue. Our district, Elmont, is called the gateway to Long Island. We're the first district across the city line. We have many, many issues that may be common to some of us here, and many issues that may be common to other school districts on Long Island. But the one real issue of commonality that we have is that we pride ourselves on academic success. We have a free and reduced lunch population of about 53%. We have increasing numbers of students with special needs. We address those needs each and every day and meet every child's IEP wanting to do so and do it rigorously. We have increasing numbers of ELL students. We are still taking in students in our district from the earthquake in Haiti in 2010 and haven't turned away one child, not one. And we still produce academic success. What I say to you is that leads up to the fact that we graduate our kids, and we're a K through 6 district, we graduate our kids to the Sewanaka Central High School District in Dr. Ferry, and 97% of them get high school diplomas. That's the fact that we're proud of. Those are our kids. And we push them there, and they're successful there, and they graduate. We're proud of all of those facts. But there are issues that we deal with each and every day that some districts may not deal with, and we're successful in dealing with them and educating all of our children. And I say that because this year we were the only district to put forth a budget revote and get over the 60% supermajority. My community, our community said to us, don't cut our children's education. Do what you have to do. So we put forth that budget, and we got a 63% voter approval. And I ask you, and I bring to you right now, I'm asking you, I guess, for some words of encouragement that I can take back to the Elmont community, that our children, that our community may not have to deal with such a trauma this year, that we'll have something encouraging to bring back so we probably won't have to face that same issue this year.
So one, that's it's a heartening thing that both that you are able to get those outcomes and that the community is committed to schools in that way. I wish I could say that I thought this year's budget cycle was going to be better than last year's. I don't. You know, the Board of Regents, the department, we will advocate for resources for public education. We will advocate for greater attention to equity in the distribution of state aid. And we will argue that new resources should be weighted towards the highest need districts to protect opportunity in those districts. And we will argue that we ought to be doing a better job as a state moving towards the unfulfilled promise of universal pre-K, which is very much not universal. We'll make those arguments. I worry that we are in a political climate where there is a resistance to contribute to the future of other people's children. And just put it frankly. One of our board members, the last board of Regents meeting, talked about a school in Brooklyn where his daughter is a principal, a very high-performing school in a very affluent section of Brooklyn, Park Slope, where the PTA raised last year $800,000 for enrichment, particularly arts programs, in addition to the budget that the city provides to the school. And on the one hand, it's an encouraging story about people's commitment to their kids and their commitment to public education, right? That those parents are making that effort. But I had to wonder how much of that $800,000 could have been raised for the school in Bed-Stuy, not 15 blocks away. And that, to me, is the moral crisis we face as a country, as a state. The notion that, you know, the way I sometimes talk about it is that people have to accept at some level, you can't build walls high enough around your community to separate your child's future from the future of the child down the road or in the city next door. You just can't. Our kids' futures are all inextricably bound together. And so the real challenge from my perspective is not just about the tax cap, because at the end of the day, the challenge of the tax cap is that 2% means one thing in one place and something very different in another place. And I accept that taxpayers in many communities are at the edge of their capacity to pay. Folks on fixed income, folks who have seen real losses in their property value. I accept that there's a challenge in terms of local capacity. But as a state and a country, do we have the capacity to ensure that every kid has a high-quality education with the resources we have as the wealthiest country, not only in the world, but that has ever been? Absolutely. And so I wish I could say, you know, that I thought this budget cycle was going to go better, but I actually think as a state and a country, we are sorely lacking leadership that would demand that we try to start taking responsibility for our collective future in a better way. And that to me is the fundamental challenge. Will people put resources into other people's children because they understand that we have a common social fabric? And I often talk about there are other states that organize school districts differently. Our heavy reliance on the property tax in New York is equity undermining. It just is. There's no analysis that will tell you that it isn't. And the fact that we have lots and lots of small districts in small confined geographic areas is equity undermining. It just is. It's just a mathematical fact. You want to look at other states that have highly inequitable school finance systems? Illinois would be a good example. Part of the reason they have lots and lots of school districts and a heavy reliance on the property tax. One way that some states have tackled that is that they have regional school systems, regional high schools, regional school systems as a whole, county-level school systems. Obviously, Nassau and Suffolk are very large. It would be difficult to do that. But regional school systems with a broader tax base can be equity enhancing. Montgomery County, for example, has schools that are right there next to some of the Long Island schools and all the lists of great high schools. But Montgomery County also has poor kids, and they put more resources in the schools that have higher proportions of poor kids than their other schools. Now, whenever I talk about Montgomery County and Fairfax County in Westchester and Long Island, people sometimes get irritated by that. But the reality is, those regional systems are equity enhancing for very real reasons about how we organize our tax system as a state and as a country. So anyway, I've gone on to, as you can see, I'm very passionate about this issue. I believe it is the issue that will define the success of our country going forward. The words of encouragement I can offer is that I and the Board of Regents and the department will be advocating to make sure that kids who are most at risk get the resources they need to have a high-quality education. And we will try to push the political discourse forward on that.
If I could speak about the department for a minute and allow you to turn left and stretch a little bit. I've had a couple of great experiences with the State Education Department in the last 30 years. One was 25 years ago when I had an opportunity to write questions for the Regents. It was great. It was affirming. The other one was just 2 weeks ago when we engaged in conversation with people who were helping us refine our now approved APPR plan. It was great. It was personal. It was very, very helpful. But I have experienced, and I've heard from my colleagues, that too often letters go unanswered. Inquiries to the State Ed Department just are not responded to in a timely fashion. My own personal experience for last year was in trying to develop a rubric. We asked for some models from the state, and I was surprised when I was told that I had to foil them. And I've always looked at SED as supportive of schools' efforts, and I really felt like that was a major disconnect. And I guess my question is, what can be done to reform that relationship, a trusting relationship between districts and the State Education Department, and one that enhances communication instead of destroys it?
So when I became commissioner, after 2 years as senior deputy, I called all the department staff together, all of our employees across all of our areas, and we have responsibility not only for K-12, but also higher ed, helping disabled adults find jobs, libraries, museums, licensing of 49 professions. Called all of our staff across the department together and said that there were 2 goals that I had that I wanted to commit the department's energies towards. One was preparing all of our citizens for college and career success, our adult learners as well as our K-12 learners, and supporting them as lifelong learners is one goal. And the second was to improve our customer service. I hope that your experience with the APPR team is indicative of a real commitment of resources that we put towards trying to do that, and a thoughtful approach to staffing that project, a real effort with our electronic submission system to try and make it easier for people to get it right and to get good support. There are other examples. We launched a website, engageny.org, with materials for helping support implementation of the Common Core. It's had over 500,000 visitors, over 3 million page views. Whenever I travel around the country, people come up to me from all parts of the country saying they've used Engage New York. We've got really good professional development videos on there with the authors of the Common Core. And we'll continue to build out that resource to support Common Core implementation. So in big ways and small ways, we are trying to improve our customer service. It is fair to say, like school districts, we have had a difficult few years in the fiscal environment. Our state funding support has been cut quite dramatically over the last few years. We, as a department, have maybe one of the most senior workforces across state government in New York, and we have many waves of retirement. So we are down over the last 2.5, 3 years, we're down well over 400 people. So, you know, we're struggling to make the resources work as best we can, as other areas of government can, but we own that customer service is a place where we need to improve, that people shouldn't have to wait to get responses. People should be able to find good, easy to find information on our website. We should be forward-leaning in our communications and getting information out directly to educators and our professionals in the fields that we license. We're making some investments in technology to support tools that will help us provide better customer service, but I acknowledge that is a real challenge. It's something we're committed to improving. I think you know, if you talk to folks on our team, that is a priority for each of them, to figure out how we get better at the customer service within, you know, difficult resource constraints.
I'm going to interrupt for a minute because I know there's one board that had to leave with the superintendent. There was a meeting. I think there's another district that has a meeting.
We have a 7:30 board meeting.
Okay.
But you're so confident that you know it's all going to go smoothly.
No, we had not planned on taking questions from the audience. That wasn't the way that we had designed this. We tried to reach out to people with questions. Could I suggest one last question from the panel, and then, or Jack, do you want to wrap this up? Why don't we do that, since there's several people who I see are anxious to get to another meeting.
First, I want to take the opportunity to thank everybody for being here today. Especially thank Commissioner King. Thank you very much for being here. And the panel itself. But I do have a question, and as a point of personal privilege, I'm going to take it. I did hear Dr. Brenner ask questions regarding you know, sort of a one-size-fits-all approach to education, and we do have individual school districts, we have individual boards of education, and we pride ourselves as communities in our education, the education we provide for our children. And I certainly understand the sentiment of Mr. Harper when it comes to the concerns we have today and the fiscal impacts of a tax cap and the pressures of implementing a system, even though it is a system that we have and our school districts have done routinely in the past. There is a significant cost to our school districts as it pushes up against the tax cap in implementing a new system, which I think is something that we should keep in mind. But you also mentioned something about equity, and it caught my attention because I am concerned, as a believer in local control, local government, community control over education, flexibility in local communities to make decisions for education for themselves. The idea of equity strikes me, and a regional approach to education strikes me as something quite different than the model that we have had historically in New York State and certainly historically here in Nassau County. And I just wanted to ask you quite directly whether or not that is the model to which you are aspiring, that is the model to which you see our state moving, and whether or not an imposed system of evaluation that cuts across all of our school district with a one-size-fits-all approach is a move in a direction of that equity that you are looking for in education, which is frankly different than the model of education that we have had in place historically.
Thanks for the question. So let me try and parse out some different points there. So one, on the evaluation system, for better or worse, the evaluation system, I think, was designed with lots of local choice. 80% of the choices about the evaluation system are locally made. There are parameters, but 80% of the choices are locally made. So the evaluation system, I think, in many ways tried to honor the notion of local control and local adaptation of practice. On the issue of equity, look, I think there is a tension between equity and local difference, and that we just have to acknowledge and that's a tension. We could go back to the founding of the country and the arguments between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. This question of how much local control and what should be controlled locally, I think is a complex one. What is clear to me is that, what I strongly believe is that a student's zip code shouldn't determine their access to educational opportunity. And to avoid that, I do think there are ways in which regionalization helps. If you take a look at the BOCES, there's a way in which the BOCES, the regionalization of career and technical education, allows for efficiencies, allows for services to be provided that might not otherwise be available to low-wealth communities. I think in some parts of the state, regional high schools are inevitable because of lost enrollment. And the reality is those high schools simply won't be able to offer the full range of opportunities, art, music, AP classes, what have you, unless they regionalize. There are places where whole districts, I think, ultimately will have to merge and consolidate simply because they don't have the enrollment. In parts of the state like Long Island and Westchester, I think there is a tension, an equity, local control tension that we just have to acknowledge, that the tax base looks very different in one community to the next, and the opportunities for kids look very different. State aid is a way, I think, that we can, in a sense, compensate for that, but it doesn't necessarily go the whole way. And when you see, take Yonkers, for example. Despite all the resources in Westchester, Yonkers this year turned away 4-year-olds because they don't have enough pre-K slots. And so, from my perspective, should we be pooling resources more to make sure every 4-year-old in Yonkers gets pre-K? I think so, because the evidence is overwhelming about the return on investment of pre-K, and our society as a whole will be better off if those students get pre-K.
And so as a final point then, to bring it full circle, knowing that we have a state education department with limited resources, knowing that we have individual school districts with limited resources, would it not then be consistent so that we can marshal those resources and put them where they're necessary to allow for those school districts that are meeting all of the rubrics and all of the standards that have been set as objectives in Race to the Top? Is it not then best practice to then provide for some form of a blanket waiver for the school districts that are high achieving so that we can focus the resources on those school districts that actually need it and need the attention of state ed and would need those limited resources that state education department has available to it to provide for greater success in those school districts?
So, I believe that the elements of the evaluation system, the notion that principals should be observing teachers and that student performance should be a factor in how we evaluate teachers and principals, those strike me as universal and sort of non-waivable. They strike me as essential to education, and they are. That's why I think you see nearly 30 states, if not over 30 states, implementing evaluation systems along those same lines with those same principles, because I think they are fundamental. But we have tried in the regulations and our implementation to honor local flexibility, Are there places where we might be able to better honor local flexibility? Maybe, and we're open to looking at that. There is a lot of choice around assessments, choice around the rubrics, choice around the amount of observation that takes place, and the law really just sets parameters. The tension on waivers and in the mandate relief conversation generally is that the big cost drivers, as you know, are the most complicated to address, and they often go to labor law issues that extend beyond our education sector, whether it's issues of health or pensions or the structure of salaries. And those are often the big cost drivers and year-over-year changes in expenses, and those are kind of statewide issues. And I think, clearly there was a conversation last year about pension reform. I think all the country is going to have to continue to grapple with those kind of legacy cost challenges, the declining enrollment challenges that we see in a lot of places around the state. So the waiver mandate relief issue, again, is just fraught with complexity to try and do it in a way that delivers flexibility on the things that would make a difference for resources. On the APPR, I would say we have tried to make it a system that honors that 80% local flexibility. Thanks, all. I appreciate the conversation.
As the nominal host here, if you could.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to have a point of privilege. My senator has allowed me to wrap up, if you will, just quickly, just to make a couple of points. First of all, thank you so much, Commissioner. Thank you, panel. Of course, Roger Tillis, our regent, and everyone in the room. I do want to sum up 3 points. And I have to tell you, I am very impressed. You are a very smart man. And I can almost agree with a lot of what you said. I want to just point out a couple of things. You talked about, and I particularly thought it was compelling about, and I had the opportunity in my past life to travel a lot in terms of comparing international scoring versus national, particularly New York State. And you brought up other parts, diet, housing, universal health care, absolutely has to be factored in. And I think that, but sometimes when you're here, and I absolutely agree for that, when you're judging a student, when you're judging their family background, what's going on, but a lot of times the educational system gets lost in the sauce, and again, you're blaming the teachers and the administrators for poor results when sometimes the problems are much larger than education and what's going on in the classroom. And we must educate the public to that too, because I do think there is a tremendous disconnect that a lot of the onus is put on the education, state ed, teachers, administration, where in fact there are other issues going on. And I think that was very compelling. I want to talk about 3 points. Communication, and I thank you, Dr. Dolan, for bringing that up. That would be a tremendous help to certainly the legislature, that if there is more communication between the schools and you, we are not as reliant. I don't want to be an educator. I don't know about Jack. I don't want to be in education. I made a decision. My parents were educators. I decided not to. So you extending communication would be much helpful. Communication, though, also extends to the selling floor. And I'm thrilled that you're here. But one thing that Jack mentioned, but I'd like to best practice. I learned in my past life that Nordstrom's was a great store. Why was it great? Because the corporation was on the selling floor. And I'm asking you to go on the selling floor and look at the best practices. I am a little prejudiced. My kids grew up in this district. I went to Brooklyn schools. I went to a good school, Midwood. And I got a good education in Brooklyn public schools. But we were best practice. And I would like to see top down on the selling floor, follow those best practices and translate that, as you say, to equity. Not to punish the best practice, but to use. Is there a way to use that best practice and amortize it, if you will, for the rest of the state? And that's something that has to be done. And that hits on what Senator Martin talks about, resources. Knowing that the resources, unfortunately, are limited. I wish everything was in education and healthcare, if I had my druthers and the environment, but not. That being said, knowing that, how do we take those best practices and utilize those resources to where it is needed? And I agree with you in equity. That's the one reason why I love New York State, because we do try at least with all our heart, including in this district, that every student gets a fair shake. But that doesn't mean, that means that even in terms of testing, you have to put, it's not just dollars, it's brain power, translating that into best practices and move the resources where it has to be. And that means maybe not what I want to elaborate what Jack had said, that allow these best practices here to help other areas, and allowing them the time rather than focusing on the test, have them help and teach and educate other districts that aren't doing as well. You kind of get what I'm saying? Because I'm not an educator, but I thank you so much for this. And hopefully, and my final ask is that this doesn't end, that you have an opportunity to meet with us again soon, because a lot, and I'm sure you're going to cull what you heard today, and we could translate this and meet again. That's my action to you, is can we have you commit to meeting with us, even if we have to go to Albany, and take the next step. Thank you.
As the nominal host, anyway, I'd like to thank Commissioner King for staying late. We very much appreciate it, and your patience are remarkable. Thank you. Thank you to everybody for being here. We appreciate it, and I too look forward to another such session.